It was just after midnight, when a strange sound broke the silence of the forest. At first, she thought it was nothing more than the cry of a night bird, carried on the cold wind. But then, it came again, louder, closer, urgent. She stepped onto her porch, flashlight in hand, and froze. In the dim light stood a wild bobcat, its spotted coat soaked from the rain, its amber eyes locked on hers. But the animal wasn't alone. Beside her, trembling, injured, was something she never expected to see. A tiny life, depending on her. Why had this elusive creature appeared at her door? And what choice would she make? That would change both their lives. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. The night was heavy with rain, a curtain of water slamming against the old cedar cabin tucked at the edge of the Appalachian woods. The storm had been building for hours, rattling loose shingles and howling through gaps in the eaves. Inside, Claire Mason sat hunched by a dim lantern, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. She had grown used to storms since moving here 6 months ago, but tonight felt different. Lonelier. Louder. Every creak in the house reminded her that she was alone. Her husband's passing 2 years ago had left a hollow she hadn't been able to fill, and retreating to the mountains was her way of hiding from a world that had moved on without her. As thunder rolled across the hills, Claire stood and moved to latch the back door. That's when she heard it. A sharp, persistent sound. Not thunder, not wind. Scratching. At her front door. Her breath caught. At this hour, with no neighbors for miles, it could only mean trouble. She hesitated, then grabbed the flashlight from the counter, the beam slicing through the darkness as she edged toward the sound. The scratching came again, urgent, almost frantic. With a shaky breath, Claire unlatched the lock and pulled the door open a crack. Her heart nearly stopped. On the porch, drenched to the bone, stood a bobcat. Its spotted fur clung to its ribs, ears flattened against the storm. Amber eyes locked on hers, glowing with a wild intensity. Claire froze, every instinct screaming at her to slam the door shut. But the bobcat didn't growl, didn't bare its teeth. Instead, it chirped, a high, bird-like sound, and then stepped back, pacing, looking over its shoulder into the darkness as if urging her to follow. Claire's nurse instincts warred with her fear. Something was wrong. This wasn't normal animal behavior. She slipped her boots on, heart pounding, and grabbed her raincoat. With the flashlight cutting through sheets of rain, she stepped onto the porch. The bobcat chirped again, then bounded off the steps, pausing to glance back at her. Against all reason, Claire followed. Claire's pulse hammered in her ears. She had seen bobcats before, from a distance, darting across lonely roads or silhouetted at dusk. But never like this. Never bringing her to a den. Never showing such strange trust. The injured kitten gave a thin cry that tore through her. Its tiny flank shuddered with each breath, ribs too visible beneath damp fur. She didn't have to be a veterinarian to recognize the danger. Shock, dehydration, maybe broken bones. The mother bobcat paced restlessly, circling her kittens, eyes flashing between them and Claire. There was no aggression, no warning snarl. Instead, there was an almost unbearable plea in her gaze, as if she knew the limits of her own power and had chosen to gamble on this human. Claire set her flashlight in the mud so both hands were free. Slowly, cautiously, she reached toward the injured kitten. To her amazement, the mother did not interfere. The tiny creature fit easily into her palm, trembling, light as air. Her throat tightened. "It's okay, little one. I've got you." The second kitten pressed closer to the mother's belly, but even that one peeked curiously as Claire lifted its sibling. The rain slicked her hair to her cheeks, but she hardly noticed. All she felt was the fragile heartbeat against her skin. She glanced back at the mother. "I'll help, but you have to trust me." The bobcat's ears twitched at her voice. Then, astonishingly, the animal dipped its head in a slow blink, the same gesture domestic cats sometimes use to show calm. Claire cradled the injured kitten inside her coat and stood, legs trembling. The mother bobcat fell into step beside her, tail lashing with tension. Together they made their way back toward the cabin, the storm still raging overhead. Inside, Claire hurried to prepare. She laid the kitten on a folded towel near the lantern's glow, carefully checking its injuries. The back leg was swollen and bent, likely fractured. Its breaths were shallow but steady. She ran through what she had on hand: basic first aid supplies, some antiseptic, gauze, splints she could improvise from kindling. She wasn't a vet, but she had patched up worse in the emergency room. The mother bobcat prowled anxiously near the door, dripping water across the floorboards, but never once growled. The second kitten stayed tucked against her chest fur, peeking out with wide eyes. Claire spoke softly as she worked, more for herself than the animals. "You picked the wrong storm to get stuck in, sweetheart. But we'll fix you up. Just hold on." She cleaned the wound, ignoring her shaking hands, and carefully bound the tiny leg. Each time the kitten whimpered, her heart squeezed tighter. When she finally tucked the creature against a hot water bottle wrapped in cloth, she exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The mother bobcat watched every move, ears swiveling, eyes unblinking. Then, to Claire's shock, she padded forward and brushed her cheek against Claire's knee, quick, fleeting, but deliberate. The gesture nearly undid her. Tears blurred her vision. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew I could help." Exhaustion settled heavy on her shoulders. The storm had not let up. Thunder rattled the windows, lightning strobed the room. But inside, something extraordinary had taken root. Claire sat back, the injured kitten nestled in the crook of her arm. The mother stretched nearby with her other kitten safe at her side. For the first time since her husband's death, the cabin felt less empty. Less like a prison, more like a sanctuary. Hours passed. Claire dozed fitfully, waking every so often to check the kitten's breathing. Each time the mother bobcat was there, a silent sentinel, her amber eyes glowing in the lamplight. By dawn, the storm had weakened. Pale light seeped through the ragged clouds, revealing a world littered with branches and debris. Claire eased stiffly from her chair, the kitten still sleeping soundly. She opened the door a crack, breathing the fresh, rain-washed air. Behind her, the mother bobcat stirred, rising gracefully. With surprising gentleness, she lifted the healthy kitten in her jaws. Then she looked at Claire, waiting. Claire swallowed. "You want him too." Reluctantly, she gathered the injured kitten, still swaddled in the towel, and held it out. But instead of taking the fragile bundle, the mother bobcat stepped aside, eyes fixed on Claire. Realization struck her with a shiver. The wild cat wasn't reclaiming her young. She was entrusting them, at least for now, to this grieving, lonely nurse in a storm-battered cabin. Claire's hands tightened protectively around the small life. Her voice trembled. "All right. I'll keep them safe." The mother dipped her head once more, then slipped out into the morning, her spotted form melting into the dripping trees. She didn't look back. Claire stood in the doorway, stunned. The storm had broken, but something else had begun, something that might change everything. They moved through the flooded yard into the dripping forest beyond. Branches whipped at her coat as she stumbled over roots and mud. The storm muffled everything except the sound of the bobcat's movement just ahead. Finally, the animal slowed. crouching near a hollow beneath a fallen oak. Claire's beam of light swept across the ground, and her breath caught again. 2 tiny kittens, no more than a few weeks old, blinked up at her with wide, terrified eyes. One was mewling weakly, its leg bent at an unnatural angle. The other pressed close for warmth. The mother bobcat chirped softly, then looked at Claire as if waiting. Claire fell to her knees in the mud, tears springing to her eyes. She whispered, "You brought me here. For them." The storm roared on, but in that moment, everything else faded. The cabin was hushed, except for the soft, steady breaths of the kittens. Claire had moved them into a small cardboard box lined with blankets, the injured one still nestled against the hot water bottle. She checked the bandage again, relieved to see no fresh bleeding. The tiny chest rose and fell with fragile determination. Her own heart felt different this morning, lighter, but also charged with purpose. She had spent months drifting, her days running together in quiet monotony. Now, suddenly, she had a reason to act, to care, to fight. She brewed herself coffee over the gas stove, the bitter steam filling the air. As she sipped, she noticed muddy paw prints across the porch. The mother bobcat had lingered during the night, maybe pacing, maybe deciding. Claire's chest tightened. She trusted me enough to walk away. The storm had knocked out the roads, so calling a vet wasn't an option. But Claire's nurse training kicked in again. She scavenged her cupboards for supplies, boiled water, clean rags, some old syringes she used for animals when administering medication. She prepared a milk substitute from goat's milk powder, whispering apologies as she fed the weaker kitten with a dropper. The kitten struggled at first, mewing faintly, but eventually latched on, swallowing with desperate hunger. Claire let out a shaky laugh. "That's it, baby." "That's the spirit," the healthy sibling copied, lapping clumsily at a shallow dish. Their tiny tongues flicked, their paws kneading the blanket instinctively. The sight tugged at something deep inside Claire, something maternal, something she had long buried after her miscarriage years ago. By afternoon, she had set up a makeshift corner for them near the fire. She found herself humming softly as she worked, cleaning, preparing warm bedding. The house that had once felt like a mausoleum suddenly rang with life again. That evening, as twilight fell, Claire heard a sound outside, that same high-pitched chirp. Her pulse leapt. She opened the door cautiously. There she was, the mother bobcat, standing on the porch with something dangling from her jaws. She dropped it at Claire's feet, a freshly caught rabbit. Claire gasped. "You brought me food?" The bobcat's eyes gleamed in the fading light. She gave a short, decisive chirp, then stepped back, tail twitching. Tears welled in Claire's eyes. It was a gift, an offering of thanks, of partnership. She crouched low, her voice trembling. "I'll take care of them. I promise." The bobcat tilted her head, studying Claire for a long moment, then melted back into the shadows of the trees. Over the next 2 days, a rhythm formed. The mother appeared at the porch each morning and evening, sometimes with prey, sometimes only to circle the cabin and peer through the window before vanishing again. Claire tended to the kittens with relentless care. The injured one, whom she secretly named Hope, grew stronger. The swelling in her leg reduced, though Claire knew it would never heal perfectly without professional care. Still, the tiny bobcat purred faintly now when held against her chest, a vibration of trust that melted every wall Claire had built around her heart. The other kitten, mischievous, bold, forever tumbling over blankets, she called Ash. Together, Hope and Ash filled the cabin with squeaks and energy, their little claws scratching on wood floors, their eyes widening with wonder at every new discovery. Claire kept her distance emotionally at first, reminding herself they were wild, that this was temporary. But at night, when the house grew quiet and the fire's glow softened, she found herself watching them with aching tenderness. Maybe they need me as much as I need them. On the fourth night, something startled her awake. A crash, distant but sharp, carried through the woods. She sat upright, heart pounding, listening. Then came a guttural growl, low, dangerous, close. She scrambled from bed, grabbing her flashlight and a heavy iron poker. When she opened the back door, her breath caught. The mother bobcat stood rigid at the tree line. Her fur bristled, ears flat. Beyond her, shapes moved in the shadows. Coyotes, drawn close by the storm's aftermath and easy prey. Claire's blood ran cold. There were at least 3 of them, eyes glowing amber in her beam. The mother bobcat snarled, lunging forward, swiping claws against the earth. The coyotes hesitated, snapping jaws, circling. Claire's heart raced. They outnumbered her, and if they broke through... The kittens inside were defenseless. Instinct took over. She banged the poker against the railing, shouting, "Hey! Get out!" Her voice cracked the silence like thunder. She grabbed a pan from the porch and hurled it, clattering into the undergrowth. The coyotes scattered, yipping, tails low as they vanished into the darkness. The mother bobcat stood panting, sides heaving. Slowly, she turned her head toward Claire. For a long, charged moment, the 2 females, one human, one wild, regarded each other across the rain-soaked yard. Then, with surprising grace, the bobcat bounded up onto the porch steps. She stopped just shy of the door, close enough that Claire could see the raindrops clinging to her whiskers. Her amber eyes softened. Claire whispered, voice breaking, "We protected them." Together, the bobcat chirped once, then leapt down and disappeared into the night. Claire closed the door, pressing her back against it, trembling. But this time her tears were not only from fear. They were from awe. Morning came with silence, broken only by the faint rustle of branches dripping with rain. Claire stirred from a restless sleep, every muscle aching with the memory of last night's terror. Her first thought was of the kittens. She rushed to their box. Both Ash and Hope blinked up at her sleepily, stretching, tiny paws reaching. Relief washed through her in a tidal wave. She sat beside them, pressing her forehead briefly to the edge of the box. "Safe. You're safe." She checked Hope's leg again, carefully loosening the bandage. The swelling had eased more, the skin warm but no longer inflamed. Hope mewed in protest, wriggling to nuzzle against Claire's palm. Ash, ever the troublemaker, tried to climb out of the box entirely. Claire laughed, the sound raw but real. "You little escape artist. You're just like your mother." Speaking the words reminded her of the night before, the way the bobcat had stood beside her against the coyotes. She still felt the charge of that connection, a wild sisterhood forged in survival. She brewed tea and sat on the porch steps, scanning the woods. She half expected to see the bobcat slip out of the trees, but the yard remained quiet, damp with early mist. That absence stirred unease. Had the coyotes hurt her? Was she lying injured somewhere out there? Claire's chest tightened. "Don't do this to me," she whispered, "not after everything." The day passed in restless chores. She mended the firewood pile, checked the roof for leaks, and gathered what food she could from the pantry. But her gaze kept drifting to the tree line. By dusk, her nerves had frayed. She paced the porch, kittens mewing inside. She nearly gave up hope when a flicker of movement caught her eye. Her breath hitched. There, emerging from the brush, was the mother bobcat. Her gait was uneven, one paw dragging slightly, but she held her head high. Mud streaked her fur, and a fresh scratch marred her shoulder. Yet she was alive. Fierce. Claire exhaled shakily, tears stinging her eyes. "You stubborn warrior." The bobcat limped closer, stopping at the porch steps. She dropped something at Claire's feet, not prey this time, but a scrap of torn fabric, faded plaid. Claire frowned, picking it up. It was part of a shirt, stained, waterlogged. Confusion furrowed her brow until realization dawned. The storm had torn through nearby cabins. People had been missing. This fabric had belonged to someone. Claire looked at the bobcat in disbelief. You're leading me somewhere, aren't you?" The animal chirped, eyes locking with hers. Then she turned, limping back toward the trees, pausing to glance over her shoulder. Claire hesitated only a moment before grabbing her coat and flashlight. "All right. Show me." They trekked through the drenched forest, branches snapping underfoot. The bobcat led with determined pace despite her limp, pausing occasionally to ensure Claire followed. After nearly 20 minutes, they reached a clearing where storm wreckage lay twisted, remnants of a collapsed cabin roof. Claire's stomach dropped. Beneath the debris, faint movement stirred. She rushed forward, dropping to her knees. A man, mid-40s, bruised and caked in mud, blinked up weakly at her. His leg was pinned beneath a beam. "Oh my God!" Claire gasped. "Hold on." The man's lips cracked. "Thought no one would find me." Claire squeezed his hand. "You're not alone. We'll get you out." With adrenaline surging, she braced against the beam, gritting her teeth as she shoved. It didn't budge. She searched the ground, finding a branch thick enough to use as a lever. Sweat stung her eyes as she pried, using every ounce of strength. At last, with a groan, the beam shifted enough to free his leg. He cried out in pain but rolled clear. Claire tore strips from her undershirt, binding the wound as best she could. "You'll be okay," she said firmly, though her voice shook. "I'm a nurse. I'll get you home." The man's gaze flickered past her. The bobcat. His voice trailed, disbelief etched on his face. Claire turned. The mother bobcat sat poised at the edge of the clearing, eyes gleaming, watching, guarding. Claire whispered, awed, "She saved you." It took hours, grueling hours, to half carry, half drag the man back to her cabin. By the time they stumbled onto the porch, her arms burned, her back screamed, and night had swallowed the woods. She laid him on the couch, tending his wounds with supplies from her kit. His name was Daniel, a carpenter from 2 cabins over, cut off when the storm collapsed his roof. "You wouldn't have made it through another night," Claire told him quietly as she splinted his leg. "But she glanced toward the door, where the bobcat lingered in shadow. "She wouldn't let you die." Daniel's eyes softened, wonder dawning. "Never thought I'd owe my life to a wild cat." Claire met his gaze, her throat thick. "Me neither." The bobcat gave a final chirp, then slipped back into the night, leaving them with her unspoken trust. That night, after Daniel drifted into uneasy sleep, Claire sat between the kitten's box and the couch, her head spinning. The storm had taken much: power, safety, normalcy. But in its wake it had given her something she hadn't expected. A purpose that stretched beyond herself, a fragile life to protect, a bond with a creature of the wild, even a fellow human survivor, pulled back from death's edge. For the first time in years, Claire felt part of something bigger than her grief. She stroked Hope's tiny head, whispering, "Maybe this was the reason. Maybe you came here to remind me what it means to keep going." In the hush of the cabin, with the fire crackling low and rain dripping from the eaves, Claire felt a small, steady spark ignite within her. Not just survival, not just endurance, but hope. And for the first time since her world had shattered, She let herself believe in it. The next morning dawned pale and cold. Fog hung low over the trees, curling in ghostly ribbons across the yard. Claire sat at the window sipping weak tea, her eyes flicking between Daniel, still asleep on the couch, and the kittens tumbling inside their box. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply watch. The world outside might have been broken, but here in this small cabin, there was life, warmth, and purpose. A scratching at the door snapped her back. She froze, mug halfway to her lips. Slowly, she set it down and crossed the room. When she opened the door, her breath caught. The mother bobcat stood on the porch again, shoulders tense, amber eyes locked on hers. But this time she wasn't alone. Behind her, in the yard, were 2 deer, skittish, half-starved, their coats slick with mud. They had followed her. Claire blinked in astonishment. "You herded them here?" The bobcat gave a soft chirp and padded forward, dropping something small at Claire's feet. A strip of bark gnawed through, still damp. Claire recognized it instantly. "Beaverwood," she murmured. "There's water nearby." A stream understanding clicked. The bobcat was showing them, where fresh water could be found. Resources. Survival. Claire turned back to Daniel, who was stirring awake. "Get ready," she told him. "We're going on a little trip." By mid-morning, Claire and Daniel were moving slowly through the forest, following the bobcat's lead. Daniel leaned heavily on a makeshift crutch, but his determination surprised her. "You sure about this?" he asked, wincing as he stumbled over a root. Claire steadied him. "If she's guiding us, I'm sure." The bobcat paused now and then, checking behind her, making sure they followed. Eventually, the trees thinned, opening into a glade where water shimmered. A wide creek, clear and flowing strong despite the storm's damage. Daniel exhaled in relief. Fresh water. God bless Claire crouched, cupping her hands to drink. It was cold, sweet, a taste of survival. She filled bottles, her fingers trembling with gratitude. The bobcat lingered nearby, her reflection rippling on the water's surface. She didn't drink herself. She simply watched, her gaze calm, steady. Claire realized then, this wasn't about her own need. This was about trust. She was ensuring Claire and Daniel had what they needed. Claire's throat tightened. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Why us?" The bobcat tilted her head as though answering, "Because we are the same. We protect. We endure." That night, back at the cabin, Daniel grew restless. His leg throbbed, his face pale with pain. Claire crushed herbs into a poultice, pressing it gently to his wound. He hissed, but didn't complain. "You know," he said after a long silence, "people don't believe animals think like this, that they plan or care. But she's different. It's like she knows what matters." Claire nodded, glancing toward the window where moonlight spilled across the porch. "She knows more than we give her credit for." Daniel's eyes softened. "So do you." The words caught Claire off guard. She busied herself with the poultice, hiding the way her cheeks warmed. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with that kind of quiet respect. The days blurred into a rhythm. Claire tended to Daniel's healing leg, cared for Hope and Ash, and watched for the bobcat's visits. Each time, the animal brought something new. A squirrel, a piece of scavenged fabric, once even a shiny tin can that glinted like treasure. And each time, Claire felt the invisible bond between them grow tighter. But not everyone would understand. On the 6th day, when Daniel was strong enough to walk with a steadier stride, he voiced the thought Claire had been avoiding. "We can't keep them forever, you know." His gaze flicked to the kittens curled near the hearth. "They're wild. They belong out there." Claire's chest clenched. I know. They'll need to learn to hunt, to live without you. Her throat tightened painfully. She thought of Hope, pressing tiny paws into her palm, her faint purr rattling like a fragile motor. She thought of Ash, leaping recklessly at shadows. She thought of nights spent curled by their box, whispering lullabies she hadn't sung in years. Letting them go felt impossible. But when she looked into Daniel's eyes, steady, kind, unflinching, she knew he was right. And when she glanced out the window, she saw the mother bobcat waiting at the edge of the trees, watching silently, patiently. Her message was clear. They're mine. They always were. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Claire gathered the kittens in her arms. Her voice shook as she whispered, "It's time." Daniel stood nearby, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. You did your part. You gave them a chance. Claire stepped onto the porch. The bobcat emerged from the shadows, her amber eyes glinting. She chirped softly, tail flicking. Claire knelt, setting the kittens down gently. They hesitated, mewing, their tiny bodies pressing back toward her warmth. Her heart fractured. Go on, she urged, tears streaming freely. She's your mother. She'll keep you safe. The bobcat lowered her head, nudging Hope first, then Ash, her rough tongue rasping over their fur. The kittens squeaked in delight, recognizing her. Ash bounded forward eagerly, pawing at his mother's chest. Hope lingered, glancing back at Claire with wide, uncertain eyes. Claire broke. She reached out, stroking Hope one last time, her voice breaking. You're stronger than you think. Just live. That's all I want. Hope gave a faint chirp, then turned and followed Ash into the tall grass. The bobcat looked at Claire one last time, holding her gaze with a depth that made Claire's breath hitch. Gratitude. Farewell. A silent promise. Then, with a flick of her tail, she led her family into the forest, vanishing into the dusk.